Alright, this is Jessica's workshop. Actually, I'm going to start with the poems because the fiction was actually doing some pretty interesting things. So I'm going to pick on the poems, excuse me, here a little bit. Because it's not that they're not doing something, it's just that what they're doing is not yet poetic, we might say. So, sorry, I'm going to pause this. I am getting another phone call. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So, Amen. I don't think you can keep the title. I mean, because it's not. I mean, it's not a devotional poem. If you were saying, almost if you were saying something like "bless you" or "gesundheit," like if somebody sneezed, right? If you use that as a kind of title, that might be kind of funny in relationship to what you're. Excuse me. I need to stop waking up at 4:30 in the morning. It might be kind of interesting as an ironic contrast to what the poem's kind of doing. It's a little heavy-handed, to say that clearly the speaker's problem is, men or whatever, because evidently we're all in league with Satan. Little known fact, it's true. Now, like it's this atheism and faith as a relationship metaphor. I don't know. It's just the tone of the poem. How about I'll put it like this: the tone of this poem and the way it's kind of moving reminds me a little bit. Now, not because there's anything relational between them. It just reminds me a little bit of Stephen Crane's poetry. You might go look at it because the way he doesn't really use imagery in the same way. He doesn't really use the voice in the same way. They're actually kind of abstract little poems, but they kind of have a resonance, kind of like this poem. I mean, the problem with this poem is that it's not risking enough. And I've said this, I'll say this in every creative writing class I ever teach. It's more or less incumbent upon the writer to at least risk something. And I think Richard Hugo put it very nicely when he said, you have to risk sentimentality to get the sentiment in there. Which is to say that, especially this is so true in poetry, because a poem, like if I were to write a love poem, right, to somebody, and it better be my wife. I'm deleting this file. No, but if you're gonna write a love poem to somebody, you have to risk the details, right, in that poem, such that if that other person read it, first of all, you could write if you love somebody, you could write them a poem that is just dumb and sappy, right, and they're gonna love you anyway, usually. That's not the problem. The problem is when somebody else reads it, can they connect to, the images and the emotions inherent to that poem? Can they conjure up those same feelings, or at least the approximation of those same feelings? And trust me, that's a very hard thing to do, right? Think about, I think we read it in class. It's that poem by Dean Young. I teach it in almost every intro class because I think it's just a really funny, charming little poem. It's the poem by Dean Young called "On Being Asked by Some Student If He Should Ask Out Some Girl," and which is technically an occasional poem, to be technical. An occasional poem is like if you wrote a poem about Easter, right? That's an occasional poem. If you wrote a poem about the marathon that happened or whatever. That's an occasional poem. And in that poem, you know, he's talking to this student, right? Real or imaginary, doesn't matter. And the speaker at one point starts to go into detail about his own relationships, and then he kind of wrenches that back. It's almost like, well, here's what, you know, I don't, it's not like he doesn't care, but it's like, here's what love looks like, kid. You know, ask her out, don't ask her out, it's not going to matter, we're all going to be dead soon anyway, is part how the poem goes. So in a poem like this, you know, it's kind of like the poem has to risk a little bit before taking it back, because if we're not risking anything, there's nothing to take back. Okay? So that's kind of where I would see this poem, or at least try to envision this poem going. So, let me... Realm. I mean, I like the opening line, write me a letter. I think you can keep the first 3 lines if you break that third line into 2 lines. Now, everything after that, except for maybe the last line, you know, once again, imagery, okay? There's no real image here, and it's referencing things that, you know, the reader has no recourse to. You know, it's like, I don't know what the domain is. Where's this? I mean, it's just like, it's just far too vague, and it needs some sense of imagery or some sense of place, maybe. It's just it's so vague. It's hard to read effectively. Stop calling me angel. Now, I kind of like this poem just because it's short, so I like that you're experimenting with form in the poems. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you this, okay, because I want to show you how you can edit this poem and make it a little bit more interesting. I took out one word. I took out the word and. Okay. Hold on, bear with me. Print the selection. So I'm going to print this out. I'm going to show it to you so that you can read it with me, because it'll make it a lot more sense. Alright, so this is just, I mean, literally I just took a stab at it, and I just said, okay, well, let's try writing this poem with only 2 words on each line. Okay, since you had 2 lines in the poem, I was like, well, let's try 2s, okay? But in order to make it work, I had to cut out one and so that the word count would fit. Okay, so let's see. Stop calling me angel. Come on, focus. You see what I'm doing there? I watched her fall from grace. Somehow it convinced me that's not where I wanted to be either. You see, it creates a whole new tone for the poem. It creates a whole new visual effect, a whole new, and this is just something that, you know, poets are going to play with. Like, that's very often my first go-to, right? When I am trying to think of, like, okay, well, how would I rewrite this poem, or how would I revise it? You know, I'll go and say, okay, try the poem with 2 lines on each, 3 words on each line, 2 words, 4 words, 5 words, whatever, you know. Oh, then try to break the stanzas in different places, and just until you kind of see what the structure of the poem needs to be. And it's a more advanced technique, and it's not something I would talk about in this class, but it's about the idea that form in poetry, form and content are always wedded. They're always married. They're always together in some way. So that when you're writing the poem's form, just how it's formally structured. If it's a sonnet, that's a form, right? If it's free verse, that's a form, but how is it going to look on the page? Those are always married. Now the content must reflect something, must have bearing upon the form, and the form must have bearing upon the content in some way. It's not that they're identical, but they are pushing through the poem together. So just play around with that. I like that you were trying to experiment with a very, very short poem, but that would be a kind of, play around with that. You might actually look at, if you want to keep with poetry, I'd say that, in my opinion, the fiction is showing a lot more, good moves, which is fine. Not everybody writes poetry and fiction. If you want to continue in poetry and in this kind of style that you're doing here, you might look at what are called the language poets. It's a school of American poetry, kind of from the 70s to the 90s. There was some of them did some interesting things. Probably one of the most, actually, she just died a couple of years ago. C.D. Wright was one of the more famous ones, although she would probably deny being a language poet, but too bad she is. Let's see. Heather McHugh, Michael Palmer. Those are some of the names that just kind of jump to mind. C.D. Wright. She used to be one. Lynn Haginian. She's very famous. She's probably, in my opinion, one of the better ones. Although, actually, if you want to look at the origins of language poetry, go back to Gertrude Stein. Go read Gertrude Stein's book Tender Buttons. Okay, and that'll be a good place to start. Anyway, to the fiction. So, maintain it. Now, that's going to clearly have to be ironic, okay? That's just, here's a relationship or marriage counselor who can't keep her own life together. Okay, so that's a funny ironic contrast. I like that. Okay, so that's good. Even the first line here, Janice looked at the couple in front of her, attractive, young, and stupid. That's a funny line. That's good. Within about a page of reading this, I could see that, you've got some talent in fiction writing. Okay, and that's good. That's really good to see. It needs, clearly a lot of revision, but I can just see from the conventions, stylistic conventions that you're using, that you get fiction. Fiction makes a lot more sense to you than poetry. Now, when she says attractive, young, and stupid, okay, be sure to keep this attitude consistent for the character. This is going to help make her, less pathetic, okay? Because her stalking the guy after 2 months, right? It doesn't, in the real world, sure, this stuff happens. My goodness, but that's the problem with fiction, is that it's not reflective of the real world. Excuse me. It's a stylized representation of the real world, okay? So, they've been dating for 2 months, she's 32, after 2 months, it's she's already thinking marriage, trust me, it can happen, okay? But there have to be more details put into the story directly that allows for these things. It could be a flashback to a previous relationship. Maybe you could think of it like psychological trauma. Like her last boyfriend or whatever said to her, you're too needy, and you're gonna end up dying alone. You know, so that's what is causing this kind of panic. Like I gotta hold on to Thomas, and I gotta make this work, and we've got to get married. You know, and then we could at least look at that and say, okay, I get it. You know, when characters start acting in ways that are inconsistent with just normal behavior, there typically have to be triggers in the story, or at least hinted at. Otherwise, the reader's just going to get confused. Like, okay, she's this professional, she's got this job, she seems very well put together, and now she's stalking a guy that she just met 2 months ago. You know, so it doesn't quite work like that. Okay. But I mean, overall, I really actually liked the story. It was very readable, and that's actually a very good criterion to understand or to apply to a story, especially a draft. I mean, it's just like you just kind of fall through the pages. You know, there were only a couple times where I had to stop and just kind of shake my head and say, well, what does this mean, or who is this? What's going on here? And that's good, right? That shows that I'm not bothered by what's coming up. It's not like I have to rethink like all these different aspects of the story. It's just you kind of move through. Okay. There, I think on page 1, this description is not bad. Sorry, these guys are trying to move stuff near my car. Anyway, so Thomas was Janice's Tavon. Now, it's not confusing to understand. Okay, it's a parallel. But here's what would happen in fiction if you parallel them like this. Okay, here's what happens. Basically, Tavon, whatever Tavon does or says, becomes paralleled with what Thomas does or says. Okay, that's how that works. Okay, now to describe him like this in, like, let's say a text message, who cares, right? That's just a text message. But here, because it's fiction, what's going to happen is it's going to set up a parallel that might be an unintended parallel. Okay, and I actually think it is, because Tavon's not really a major character in the book. Sorry, there's so much construction going on around my house. They've stripped off the asphalt in the street out here down to the original brick, like down to the old brick streets. So it's kind of cool to see that. My town here where I live is very old. I think my house is like 130, 140 years old. Anyway, so that's what I mean by setting up that parallel. Okay. Now I had this question looming here, and it's answered later. Okay, so I think that's good. You don't have to answer it now. You know, but when he's going to this staff party, I just said, why not invite her? You know. Now you explain this later, but I think it might be more believable, and I think this story is going to live or die on its believability. I think it's going to be more believable if he at least makes a gesture at the invitation, like, "Are you sure you don't want to come?" You know, like or something like, "Well, I mean, I asked you yesterday, and you said no, but are you sure you don't want to come?" You know, and so maybe he's doing something wrong. I don't know. It wasn't quite clear whether or not he's innocent. But, you know, or maybe he's trying to force the issue to make sure that she's not going to be there. You see, so what? It's like what's he doing, right? So try that, okay? Just make a little gesture. So I like that you mentioned that they've been dating for 2 months. That's good, okay? But when you say on page, is it 2? Yeah, page 2. They had been dating for 2 months. Right. Though they had been dating for 2 months, Janice felt it was time to have a come over and chill experience already. Actually, it's a comma splice is the problem in that sentence grammatically, but you know, in 2 months they haven't had a come over and chill moment, like relaxing together. I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but, you know, that just doesn't seem That doesn't seem normal. You know, are they both so busy? And for example, like if they haven't had a come over and chill moment, how is she already planning marriage, right? So it's like, I mean, it's starting to paint her as somebody who's a little bit, you know, Fruit Loops, and I don't know that somebody who's that aggressive about her relationship, or whatever. I don't know that somebody like that could hold down a job effectively as a relationship counselor. I don't know. These are little threads that are starting to pull the story apart. Okay. So I like, you know, she's waiting for Thomas to call, you know, all this. On page 3, stalker, my sister is crazy, you are definitely Karen's daughter. That's a good detail. That's a definitely good detail because, you know, you're referencing something that's not necessarily important to the story, but it makes the story feel lived in. Like, of course, her and her brother have a mom, right? Of course, the mom has a name, okay? Now, that makes the story feel like these are real people. That's good. So I just want to point that out because that's a really good detail. On page 4, now you keep switching names here. It's either Jane or Janice. Keep it consistent. Okay? Janice was astonished that Casey Antoine was to Thomas's work thing. Now, it was to Thomas's work thing. Now, this might be actually a Bahamian English thing, because that preposition to in at least American and British English would be at. So I don't know if that's just a difference in, because all the versions of English use prepositions slightly differently. It's like saying, are you going to come by me, meaning to my house, right? So that by me or by you or by them, right, indicating where they live. I actually, when I first heard it, because one of my colleagues was using it, and I know that she speaks German, and in German you would say like by mir or by dir to mean at my house or at your house. So I thought it was like, are you using that as a German? But it turns out it's a Bahamian thing. So it might that kind of. I just want to ask about that. Now, Jane in this paragraph suddenly sees all these other women and gets, you know, very jealous of their appearance. It's hard to figure out where she is on the side of the street where she herself had parked. I mean, does she have like amazing vision? I mean, this is nighttime. Like, how well lit is this area? Are they under a street lamp? You know, are there floodlights? It's kind of unclear, you know, because like go outside at night, okay? Go outside at night, look around, and then tell me how many details you really see, right? Now, it's a small thing, but this is what I mean. Like, this story is going to sink or swim based on its believability. But this whole idea, like, oh, she didn't realize how beautiful this person was, it seems a little ham-fisted to me. So I don't know if that's necessary for the story. Now, so she clearly wants this relationship to work, okay? Now, what's going to happen? So you're about, probably, I'd say, almost halfway through the story, so that's good, right? Maybe a little less. But so it sounds like he's like getting a little desperate for her. Okay, good. But what's going to happen? What is the complication? Like, what does she want, and how is that going to complicate? She's going to have to make a choice here soon, okay? And that's like an irreversible choice. That's super important for fiction. Irreversible choices. So she's going to have to make an irreversible choice here soon that is going to necessarily, right, impact her life. So this is what I want you to do. Think of what she wants, not just Thomas, okay? Not just marriage, but some sort of emotional combination of these things. Put her on that path and put a bunch of obstacles in her way, okay? Maybe Thomas is cheating. Maybe he's, I mean, heck, maybe he's married. You know, I don't know. So let that be the guide for the story. But I think the story is actually working very well. I mean, it's very, very readable. I just need some stuff to happen in it. Okay. But otherwise, I thought it was really, really nice. So thank you for that. Makes my job actually kind of fun. So well done.